Hi, witches. I'm Blair Bathory, and this is the Something Scary podcast. Actually, the Halloween edition of the Something Scary podcast, which is even better. Thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first time or you're one of the brave souls who join us every week. Just wanted to share a couple of quick spooky announcements for Halloween. This week, Steffany Strange is back with a new video on our YouTube channel. I'm so excited to see her face again, so make sure to go check that out. And also, I've been prepping to start doing videos myself, so we will be having a video version of the podcast every week very, very soon. I'll update you all when we know more about that. Other than that, I just wanted to wish you a very happy October 31st and the spookiest Halloween, or whatever you do to celebrate that day, or don't. But otherwise, I'm sending you the best scary wishes and nightmarish dreams. As you're planning for your Halloween night, remember the line between fun and fear can blur in an instant. Even your most innocent plans can take a terrifying turn. From haunted mazes to lurking shadows and ghosts coming out to play, think twice before you venture into the dark. First, an animatronic takeover, followed by a true legend of Harry Houdini. Finally, in our last story, can you outrun the fear that hides in the darkness? Before we get to our stories, I wanted to tell you something exciting. In 2 weeks, we'll be launching our brand new Patreon storyteller experience. We know how much you love spooky stories, and we want to be able to enjoy them in some fun and new ways. The storyteller experience will allow fans to collaborate on stories, get feedback on your stories from the Something Scary writers, and give exclusive videos that tell you more about the lore and legends behind the stories. We're going live exclusively on Patreon with this on November 11th, but I just wanted to let you know to look out for it and stay tuned for more fun with Something Scary. We hope you have the best Halloween ever. So, want to hear something scary? Halloween Horror Show. Plush toys aren't a comfort to everyone. Although soft and cuddly, they can bring a terrible nightmare, like in this story inspired by Christopher Barron. Halloween had finally arrived. The locals were buzzing, ready to tackle the new mazes at the local theme park. One of the top attractions was Stuffiez, a nightmarish walkthrough, several scenes starring various stuffed animals that everyone had grown up with. Its proprietor, Mr. Gutierrez, was known to everyone simply as Mr. Guts. He'd been at it so long, no one bothered with his full name anymore. This year, Stuffiez was primed to be the main attraction, with Mr. Gutierrez promising a new and improved experience. He had replaced live actors with animatronics, and despite some initial hesitation, he was sure this decision would make for an even scarier maze. He gleefully checked off the final preparations. Everything was set. Stuffiez was officially ready for opening day. As Mr. Gutierrez headed toward the main door, a sudden burst of giggling echoed through the halls. He rolled his eyes. No doubt, he had forgotten to turn off one of the sound effects. He retraced his steps and found a switch that had indeed been left on. He flicked it off with a smirk, feeling satisfied. But as soon as he turned his back, the giggling returned, louder this time. He froze. Turning around slowly, he saw that the switch remained off, yet a single spotlight now illuminated the bloody form of a small stuffed hippo. The plushie grinned at him with a crooked smile. He recognized it instantly as Pinky, a fan favorite. The actors used to love playing her, but Pinky wasn't supposed to be there. With a frown, he muttered, "Must have fallen off something," and walked toward the plushie to put it back. But as he approached, Pinky was gone. His heart skipped a beat. He scanned the floor and nearby displays, but Pinky was nowhere in sight. Before he could rationalize it, something rushed past him, knocking him to the ground. The air was filled with deep, distorted giggling. His breath caught in his throat as he spotted a shadowy figure dart around the corner. Klopster, a large horse plushie, one of the new animatronics he'd programmed. Gutierrez sprang to his feet and instinctively gave chase. No way I'm letting some punk mess with my maze. He turned the corner just in time to see Klopster standing at the end of the hall, holding Pinky in its stuffed hooves. The horse then tossed Pinky aside, its hollow eyes fixed on Mr. Gutierrez. Gutierrez took a step forward, but stopped in his tracks. From the shadows, a life-size Pinky stepped out, moving with an unnatural smoothness. The mechanical joints should have clicked in word, but the plush hippo moved almost fluidly. "I don't know what kind of prank this is, but I want you out of here now," Mr. Gutierrez barked, his voice quivering more than he intended. He rushed forward, grabbing Klopster by the neck and shoving it against the wall. But the moment his hands clamped around the plush, he froze. The fabric was soft, far too soft, like there was nothing inside. With a trembling hand, he pulled off Klopster's headpiece, expecting to see a kid beneath. The headpiece dropped to the floor with a thud. No one was inside. His chest tightened with panic. His legs moved on their own, stumbling backward as his mind scrambled for an explanation. The giggling returned, now joined by a soft, mechanical whirring. Pinky was approaching, her hollow eyes gleaming under the dim light. She reached out and grabbed him, pinning him to the wall with a strength that belied her size. Mr. Gutierrez cried for her to let him go. Pinky leaned closer and removed her head, empty, just like Klopster. Her hollow body shuddered unnaturally as he held him in place. He begged to know what she wanted from him, and he tried to twist free. Klopster stepped closer, pulling its own head off with the same unsettling smoothness. Mr. Gutierrez felt bile rise in his throat as the two empty costumes pressed closer, suffocating him with their presence.
"Our friends,"
Pinky hissed in a wispy voice.
"You took away our friends, the humans."
Klopster echoed.
"We love them, and you took them away from us."
Mr. Gutierrez's mind raced. The plushies, they were talking about the actors, the ones he replaced with machines. He gasped, then swore he would bring them back as he pleaded for his life. The hollow costumes pressed in, suffocating him with their fabric.
"We know you will."
Opening day finally came. The park was packed, with excited visitors eager to experience the new Stuffiez. A few regulars noticed some subtle changes, like the title being tweaked to Mr. Guts' Stuffiez. But most thought the new additions were brilliant. They especially loved the new introduction, a stitched-together animatronic man with a grotesquely stretched-out smile. He wore a name tag that read, Mr. Gutierrez, though the letters had been crossed out, leaving just Mr. Guts. The guests marveled at how lifelike he looked, right down to the fear frozen in his eyes. What would you do if the things meant to entertain you turned against you? Have you ever walked through a haunted maze knowing and felt like something inside might be watching you? We want to hear more of your stories, so send us an email at somethingscary@snarl.com and we might just put it on the podcast. Before Harry Houdini died, he promised his wife if there was an afterlife, he would contact her from beyond the grave. Every Halloween for 10 years after he died, she would try to contact him on Halloween night. Since then, others have tried to carry on the tradition. This is one of their stories, written by Sara. QC stood outside the looming structure, her phone casting a glaring glow across her face. The building, once the glamorous Knickerbocker Hotel in Hollywood, now stood like a tombstone under the pale Halloween moon. She adjusted her Queen of Scream hoodie and gave the camera her signature smirk. "Hey, Scream team, tonight we're going to do something epic. You know the Knickerbocker Hotel, right? Houdini seances, old school glam. Well, it's a retirement home now, but who cares? We're summoning the spirit of the legendary Harry Houdini. Who's ready for some real screams? Her voice had the excited tone of someone who thought they were in control. To QC, this was just another spooky gimmick for her channel. She was known for pushing the boundaries, turning haunted locations and creepy legends into viral hits. She was an influencer after all, with her spooky-themed channel drawing thousands of live viewers each stream. Behind her stood Sara and Jared, her trusty companions for the night. Jared gave Sara a nervous glance. Sara, the skeptic, rolled her eyes and told QC it was going to be another bust. Legend had it that Houdini was all about debunking the paranormal. Jared, though, was quieter than usual, shuffling his feet as they approached the shadowy courtyard. He said there was just something about the place that felt unusual. Chill, QC shot back, her smile widening. The more freaked out you are, the better the content. They positioned themselves outside the wrought iron gates, just beyond where the Knickerbocker once held its rooftop seances. QC set up the camera on a tripod, making sure the building's silhouette creeped ominously in the background. The chat on her phone was blowing up with viewers sending fire emojis, skulls, and taunts, egging her on. Okay guys, it's midnight. You know what that means. She held up an old photo of Houdini, printed off the internet, with a candle that flickered in the breeze. We call upon the spirit of Harry Houdini. If you're here, give us a sign. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the dead leaves at their feet. Sara snorted. Oh yeah, big magic moment. Jared shifted uncomfortably. He could swear he heard something, a faint whisper that seemed to snake out of the darkened windows behind them. He opened his mouth to say something, but QC raised her hand for silence. Houdini, the greatest escape artist of all, if you can hear us, show yourself, QC said, her voice lower, more serious now. A gust of wind blew out the candle, plunging them into complete darkness. The chat erupted, messages flying in about how staged it looked. A few viewers claimed to have seen something behind QC, but she wasn't reading comments now. She was focused. The air felt thick, suffocating, like it was closing in on them. QC's breath hitched, and she blinked at the sudden pressure on her chest. A coldness wrapped around her like a clawed hand. Sara's voice trembled as she nudged QC. She told her to stop. It wasn't funny anymore. Shut up, QC snapped, though her voice wavered. It's just the wind. Stop being dramatic. Then it came, a single loud knock. The sound reverberated through the air, too close to ignore. QC turned slowly, her phone camera still trained on her pale face. Did you guys hear that? Yeah, Jared whispered as he turned to look at the building behind him. They stood frozen, staring at the dark windows of the retirement home. Another knock, then a faint scratching, like something was dragging its nails against the walls. QC's eyes widened as she realized it wasn't coming from inside the building. It was behind them. She spun around, holding her phone up to the shadows that stretched across the courtyard. Nothing but darkness met them. QC, let's get out of here, Sara whispered, her tough girl facade crumbling as the scratching grew louder, now circling them. QC opened her mouth to laugh it off when the voice came, a raspy, guttural whisper that slithered out of the shadows like a snake.
You called me?
Gerald stumbled back, knocking over the tripod, sending the camera crashing to the ground. QC's phone trembled in her as she whipped around, frantically searching for the source. What the hell was that? The air chilled to a bone-deep cold as the whisper grew louder, more distorted.
I am here.
The voice crackled like static, like something was pushing its way through a broken speaker. But this was no audio trick. Suddenly, the gate behind them slammed shut with a deafening clang. QC screamed, the sound piercing the night as Sara and Jared bolted for the nearest exit. But QC was rooted in place, staring at the dark figure slowly emerging from the shadows of the building, its form twisting like smoke. The figure's eyes gleamed unnaturally bright, as if mocking her. Houdini? No, it couldn't be. The figure was too wrong, too warped. This was something else. "QC, run!" Jared shouted, tugging at her arm. But she couldn't move. The coldness was seeping into her bones, into her mind, freezing her from the inside out. Her breath came in shallow gasps as the chat on her phone exploded with viewers begging her to leave, screaming in all caps that something was behind her. But she already knew, and as the figure lunged toward her, its voice filling her head with twisted, echoing laughter, QC finally understood. This wasn't entertainment anymore. The last thing the stream showed before going dead was QC's phone hitting the ground, her terrified scream echoing in the dark as the screen cut to black. Have you ever successfully contacted anything through a seance? Were they a kind spirit? Or did something terrifying happen to you? Let me know in the comments below if you have used a Ouija board, and if you haven't, would you? Sometimes the scariest things happen when you're least prepared for them, particularly when you're just trying to have fun, like in this story inspired by Juliette Garcy. Christian and his family lived in a small, quiet town in Vermont. He and his brother Hunter had spent their whole lives there, and by now, they were used to the nothingness. No exciting events, no real danger. A burglary or missing kid? It hadn't happened in decades. Even fun things, like a carnival coming to town, felt like ancient history. The most exciting thing was the talk about a beast that lived in the woods, ready to kill. They say the beast was once a teen who had been cursed to the woods around their town, only coming out on Halloween when the barrier between worlds was thin. It was drawn to the fear in the air. It hunted anyone who wandered too far, feeding on their terror before dragging them into the dark, never to be seen again. Everyone knew it wasn't true. It would be too exciting for their boring little town, but at least it gave the kids something to talk about. Whenever Christian and Hunter complained about the boredom, their mom would always respond with the same line. "Trust me, it's much nicer here, safer." She would say this with a smile. The one thing Christian looked forward to every year was Halloween. The town transformed, and the usually empty main street was crowded with hundreds of kids in costumes, trick-or-treating at local businesses and houses. It was the one night where things felt alive. Every year, Christian and Hunter dressed up together and competed to see who could get the most candy. Christian usually won, thanks to his baby face, something their mom always teased him about. But this year was different. Hunter had just turned 14 and suddenly decided that trick-or-treating was for little kids. Christian begged him to go, and their mom stepped in to mediate, convincing Hunter to babysit his younger brother. Reluctantly, Hunter agreed, but Christian knew he'd have to ignore his brother's attitude if the night was going to be any fun. Their mom was relieved. She even said they could stay out after dark this year. Hunter dressed up as a zombie, while Christian went as a killer clown, his favorite costume so far. Their mom dropped them off in town and reminded them that she would pick them up at the clinic, a few minutes walk from Main Street. It seemed a little far, but Christian didn't mind as long as Hunter stayed with him. At first, the night went well enough. They visited a few houses together, gathering candy while Christian tried to keep the mood light. But it didn't last. Soon enough, Hunter spotted his friends from school. Without a second thought, Hunter ran off with them, leaving his younger brother behind. "I'm gonna go, Christian. See you later, okay?" Hunter called over his shoulder. "Wait!" Christian shouted. "Mom said we have to stay together." Hunter's friends laughed, and Christian's stomach dropped. "Relax, Laurel," Hunter smirked, using Christian's middle name, the one he knew Christian hated. It had belonged to their grandmother, and while Christian didn't despise her memory, he hated the way Hunter used it to mock him. "You'll be fine on your own. If not, you can call Mommy," Hunter teased, walking away without a second glance. Christian stood there, fists clenched, watching as his brother and his friends disappeared down the street. He hated how Hunter changed when he was around them, becoming someone mean and distant. Christian wasn't used to being alone. He was a little brother, a person who had always had his brother or his mother with him. Alone now, Christian tried to make the best of the night, but the fun was gone. He collected candy and people complimented his costume, but it wasn't the same. By the time most of the houses had run out of candy, the night had grown darker, and Christian figured his mom would expect him and Hunter to meet her soon. He decided to walk to the clinic, hoping that by the time he got there, his brother would show up. Maybe this is normal, he thought to himself. I just haven't noticed how dark it actually gets in late October. The streets were nearly empty, and Christian's footsteps echoed as he made his way out of town. Where were all the other kids? The night seemed to grow quieter with each step, and a sense of unease crept in. He glanced around, wishing Hunter were with him. As he walked, the sound of crunching leaves under his feet was the only thing he could hear. But then, suddenly, it wasn't just his footsteps anymore. A second crunch, just a beat behind his own, made him freeze. Christian stopped, holding his breath. The crunching stopped too. He scanned the empty street and the field beside it, but it was too dark to see anything. Maybe it was just his imagination. He started walking around, a little faster now, but the sound followed him, crunching just behind, growing louder. His pulse quickened, and he stopped again, his breath shallow. The crunching stopped in unison with him. "Very funny, Hunter," he called out into the dark, hoping his brother had come back to play some stupid prank on him. But no one replied. Then, out of nowhere, the footsteps grew faster, rushing toward him. Christian's heart leapt into his throat, and without thinking, he broke into a run, his feet pounding against the dirt. The footsteps behind him grew louder, closer, chasing him. Christian ran as fast as he could, not daring to look back. His legs burned. His lungs ached, but he could see the clinic up ahead, a beacon of light in the pitch-black night. He could see his mom's car parked outside. He was almost there. He slowed down when he saw her. She stepped out of the car and smiled, but her expression quickly shifted to one of horror. "Christian!" she screamed. "Where's your brother?" Her voice was sharp with panic. "Run! Now!" Christian's stomach dropped. The fear in her voice was palpable. He broke into a full sprint, his legs aching with the effort. Before he could reach her, a heavy thud landed on the back of his head. Pain exploded in his skull as the blood streamed down his face. He stumbled and collapsed to the ground, unable to stop the fall. The stars overhead twinkled indifferently as Christian lay there, paralyzed by pain. Somewhere in the distance, he heard his mother scream, a raw, desperate sound that made his chest tighten. His mind was sluggish, his body numb, but through the blur, he saw a dark figure above him. It wasn't a human, although it stood tall on legs. It was a beast. Its arms were thick as logs and covered in blood. It stood still for a moment before bending down to grab him. "Get away from him!" his mother cried, her footsteps pounding toward him, her voice frantic. She was so close, but it didn't matter. Figure gripped him by the legs and dragged him across the ground, pulling him further away from the light of the clinic. Christian's body felt heavy, his head throbbed, and all he wanted to do was close his eyes. The stars slipped in and out of view as he was dragged into the darkness, his mother's cries growing fainter with each passing second. The last thing Christian saw before the darkness took him was his mother, arms outstretched, racing toward him, her face contorted in terror as her voice echoed in the night. What is it about the darkness? Or was it Halloween that made it seem so creepy? How would you face something terrifying when no one is around to help? Have you ever had someone chasing after you? Tell us about it. If you haven't seen, I've been hosting a campaign of videos for Fangoria, which is the oldest horror genre magazine in the world. And I did 100 videos for them, counting down the scariest horror movies of all time, voted by their fans. So if you haven't been able to check that out, please go to their channels and give it some love. I worked really hard on it. But also, if you need a horror movie recommendation for Halloween, that's your place to find one. I wanted to ask if you would take a minute to rate and review this podcast and send it to a friend who is also getting ready for Halloween. It's one of the ways you can help Something Scary continue to grow, and it only takes a minute. Thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful for the support of all of our listeners. This week's podcast stories were edited by Sara Lukasiewicz, Narration by Blair Bathory. Audio edited and mixed by Fitz Harris. Additional audio editing by Calvin Linderman. Produced by Ana Villalobos. Executive produced by Gail Gilman. Music by Sapphire Sindalo and Calvin Linderman.